Okay.
The leaders have spoken. Now it's our turn. This is the On the Ledge podcast on the iHeartRadio Talk Network.
Indeed it is. It's showtime. Welcome in, folks. And it's a bit of this is the twilight version of the doubleheader today. We did an earlier show, set the table for the debate tonight on the Ledge, the daily edition. And then, as promised, we're doing the post-debate show. So a little different because we're just audio only, but we are live on Newstalk 1010 tonight. And don't worry, we're also going to post it as our regular podcast offering on Apple, iHeart, Spotify, etc. So let's get around the table, and who is here to bring us up to speed on what we just heard over the last 90 minutes. John Wright is our resident pollster and a founding member of On the Ledge. Tim Hudak is here. He is the former leader of the Progressive Conservatives in Ontario, also partner at Counsel Public Affairs. And Deb Hutton, host of the Deb Hutton Show. I think Deb is the person responsible for pinning Tim's mitts to his cuffs just to make sure everything's straight for him on a daily basis. And Lindsay Broadhead is here, our corporate comms strategist and part of our cast on Now and Next, our communications and strategy team. Deb, you're new to the show, so let's let you kick things off. Just general thoughts, ideas. What did you hear in the last 90 minutes?
So, I mean, I'll break it down, Dave, I think kind of individually on what I thought they needed to do and what they did or didn't do. So start with the Premier. He needed to stay calm, not let them get under his skin. And I think he did that. He talked at the top and at the bottom about tariffs and Trump, and he bridged pretty well every vulnerable issue, and he's got a lot of them, back to a strong economy. So I actually think he held his own. He was fine. No win, no loss, which for an incumbent puts it in the win category for me. Bonnie Crombie, I thought her first half of the debate was a disaster. She relied so heavily on notes. She didn't use her camera well. I mean, the Premier never deviated from right into the camera and therefore right into your living room. And Bonnie did not use her camera well. She was way too hot in the first half. She found her footing in the second half and definitely had a better debate. There was a line that she used, Dave, that really struck me in a bad way, which was she talked twice about the fact that two of her kids just got married this summer, which is a great anecdote. But then she said, I don't want my grandchildren living in Doug Ford's Ontario. I thought it was a disastrous comment and kind of indicative of where she was. Reliance on her notes just meant that you didn't connect with her. So she needed to lay a glove on Doug. She needed to make her point on healthcare. And I didn't think she did either of those things. She has to say why she's going to be different and she's actually going to get family docs in 4 years. And what the cost of that is going to be. And I don't mean the financial cost, like what she's actually going to do. I didn't think she did that. I thought Marit had a fantastic debate. She's very relatable. The camera loves her. She used her camera well. She seemed comfortable in her own skin. She had good conversations. I mean, one of the highlights of the debate was, I think, her and Schreiner having an actual conversation and debate. And look, I like Mike, but I don't know why we spend much time talking about him. So there we go.
All right, Lindsay, pick it up there. I mean, I'm not going to offer notes yet, but not thinking Deb's too far off the mark here.
No, I think Deb hit a lot of center targets there. I want to talk a little bit about the structure and the format of the debate, which was really interesting, and I think favored Ford. The energy levels that Deb kind of touched on, I mean, it felt almost, when you're watching your parents fight and it's just feeling a little anxious, and it made me feel a little anxious. Bonnie's energy was ricocheting off the ceiling, and Doug, you were kind of like, oh my God, I know you're trying to stay calm, Premier, but like he was performing calmness, and she was performing the animal in the cage trying to stir him. He didn't bite, but she just kept going. So as a viewer, the energy differential was quite straining, and that affected both of their abilities, I think, frankly, to land a solid message. Ford felt really repetitive, frankly, in a lot of his messages. And I hate to compare because I don't think they're comparable, but he was quite Trumpian in many places, like the most of this over and over and over again. I wanted to hit myself in the head if I heard it one more time, or at least make it a drinking game. So that's kind of where I started overall in terms of the players, but the format was fascinating, and I hope we can spend some time getting there. And then to Stiles, like she's very steady as she goes. She's someone who is a strong leader of her party, perhaps, but I don't think either she or Schreiner gave us anything that was new by way of being the premier.
Yeah, John, it was interesting as both Deb and Lindsay have pointed out. I thought, okay, if I'm listening to this on the radio, I'm getting a completely different impression of Bonnie Crombie than if I'm watching it on television.
I guess so. I have to say, though, that I've watched a lot of these debates over all of these many years, and I actually witnessed the big knockout with Mulroney and Turner, and I'm sure a few others here did too. But I just don't get it anymore. I saw in 2015, Rudyard Griffiths at the Monk debates actually hosted what I thought was a great debate. It was very informative. It was thoughtful. It was quiet. And these turn into just yelling, sessions where one's trying to one up the other and yell over top of the other and go at it. So part of it's the format, Dave. Secondly, I agree with the analysis already given on the candidates, but I think tomorrow, you kind of, the rest of the population who are doing many other things tonight will wake up to find out what the media thought about who wins and who loses. So I would say Ford wins, Stiles comes second, Schreiner probably comes third, Bonnie comes fourth, and that's only because I thought she, again, what Deb said, read an awful lot from cards and was, as Lindsay said, was pretty hot most of the night just in terms of how she responded to things. But I would have to say that I didn't learn much new. I didn't really learn anything other than the talking points. And the one thing that I noticed, though, was at the very end, when Bonnie Crombie was signing off, she turned and said, I want the NDP to vote for me this election because that way I can fix healthcare. It was the only time that really what should have maybe gone on tonight was the Liberals attacked the NDP. I mean, Doug Ford's solid, but it's a fight for that second or third place in the legislature because we can see it in the numbers. I was a bit surprised that she tended to just go after the premier as opposed to try and undercut the NDP to get that vote moving over to the Liberal.
Just before we get to your notes here, Tim, I just want to fire a comment that the Doug Ford made, and that was directed at Bonnie Crombie, talking about her record as mayor and talking about tax cuts, etc. Because I think it was an important note, but also an opportunity lost for Crombie.
I almost fell off the stage here, David, when Bonnie Crombie said she'll cut taxes. When she was mayor, she raised taxes every year, raised the garbage tax, raised the water tax, raised property taxes every year. Matter of fact, at one time, Mississauga was well run until Bonnie came along.
So, Tim, when I heard that, and she took the bait there in terms of kind of getting drawn into the municipal politics, her answer should have been, listen, I have to balance my budget unlike what you do at Queen's Park. You are the highest spending premier. There was an opportunity there for her to drive a truck right down the center of the 401 and keep barreling. She didn't sound prepared. She should have been ready for that.
Yeah, sure. Or not take the bait at all and take it right to Ford. So look, one clear takeaway, Ford and Crombie do not like each other. I'm trying to think of a time where I've seen more personal animosity between two candidates in all the provincial debates I've watched. Let me take it back to the big question. Look, I think Ford won by not losing. He did stay largely calm. He played error-free ball. I think put it away, Dave. I think this election is now over. That was their big chance to score a big wound on Ford. So Ford, he wins by mission accomplished. Marit Stiles is my co-winner of the debate. I think she came across as very relatable, likable, good energy, and in what seemed like a very hot room, seemed relatively cool. Third, Mike Schreiner. Mike was actually weaker. I thought he would have done better in what is now his third debate, and he seemed a bit more agitated and worked up. Before, he was very likable and approachable, not so much. And look, I think Bonnie Crombie had the worst provincial debate performance I have seen. I've been watching debates since I, learned to drive, and I cannot think of somebody who came across worse in the first half of the debate. She came across as harsh, looked nervous. She looked unprepared, looked at her notes far too often, and did not come across people watching at home as somebody that they trust to look out for their issues or to run the province.
Yeah, Lindsay, the issue, I mean, you could chalk it up to rookie nerves, but we've talked all the way along in the first 2.5 weeks of this campaign so far as, the issue for them has been this lack of preparation, as if they didn't see it coming.
Well, and if this debate and indeed this election is about anything, we can't have a rookie in the seat, right? And that's what Ford, I think, has hammered home over and over again. There was a few messages he had that he repeated often, and they landed, right? Which is, I'm gonna fight for you, certainly. I'm gonna protect you. So some campaign type of language. But also on the economy in particular, he said, I'm different than these guys, full stop. I don't know how many times. Under my watch, I've got you economically. Those aren't rookie things to do, right? Those are experienced leader things to do. And, even though we are ranking all of these candidates, I mean, at the end of the day, the four of them aren't breaking out of the starting gates at the same time, right? The Liberals here are fighting for official party status. That's the debate. That's the fight. And the NDP may be there as well. So it's a funny game that they're playing.
I want to come. Yeah, go ahead.
To John's point, if Bonnie Crombie had a good line at the end, if you want to stop forward, vote for me. I've got the only one chance. But she should have said that throughout the debate. She should have led with that. Should have gone back to it. It got lost.
Well,
and actually, I'm surprised, Dave. Like you mentioned tariffs. Like I thought half of this debate was going to be about what's happening to us from the U.S. And the issues of tariffs. And that could have brought up so many juicy issues for the non-PC parties around auto and investments and all this stuff. Nothing of substance there. It was just a bizarre vacuum. I wouldn't have voted if I were to bet in terms of what the subject of these debates would be about. I would have lost. Absolutely.
Well, I think it was interesting. I noticed that Deb, as Doug Ford was talking, he talked about tariffs without using the word tariffs, so all the way through the debate, which I thought was brilliant.
Yeah, he talked about the economy. And I actually had flashbacks to 1999, where Mike Harris's entire mantra was, we can't have all of these nice things without a strong economy. So, and that is exactly what the premier did. And to your point, that is about tariffs. But he talked about it in terms of the economy, which I am guessing was their 100% strategy, and he nailed it.
Yeah,
Can I just say on the Bonnie Marit thing?
Yeah,
though?
please. Yeah.
When Marit went after Bonnie on the $25,000
that was good.
Tim and I are laughing though, because it's like $25,000. Oh my God, how are you not embarrassed that that's the amount of money that you got from them? How little. But she did not know what to do with it. Like she was just like really, really taken aback by it. It was a terrible part of the debate for her. And it's irrelevant. The issues are relevant, but her ability to handle it was really weak. And Marit's new too. This is her first debate. It did not look like her first debate.
No, but you know what came through there was, I think there was the muscle and the callus perhaps that she's developed, Deb, during question period. She's been pretty effective in question period, taking, the premier on.
But she hasn't moved numbers with it.
No, for sure. But I'm just in terms of performance, right? I mean, where she looked like tonight she belonged. She didn't really stumble. She looked like she was able to handle the conversation. Showed up, knew her files. She wasn't looking down. And all of those things. So I think that kind of shone. But you're right. There's the other side of it. And John, just before we go to break, though, earlier today in the afternoon edition of On the Ledge, we were noting that 338 had both the Liberals and the NDP sort of rising above the water level there into official party status. Does this change any of that tonight?
I don't think it does. And I think a lot of it may be artificial in the sense that we're getting polling numbers that are showing the lift given to the feds, and it may be bleeding over into certain areas in the province as well. I don't think this changes anything. And I'd like to come back to this after the break, because I'm not sure. I know what Doug Ford stands for, but at the end of this debate, I didn't hear the slogans of the other two. I don't know what they stand for at the end of the day. If you're just tuning into this for the first time, there's nothing there to make me say the NDP and the Liberals, actually, this is their ballot question, other than get rid of him.
Yeah,
I didn't hear it.
So we'll come back to that, and I do want to get a little bit more into the format of this and the efficacy of the way this is set up. We give them 60 seconds to talk about the most important issues facing Ontarians, and it doesn't matter what end of the question that you're on. All right, this is the radio edition of On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. It's the post-debate edition. We've got Deb Hutton here, Tim Hudak, John Wright, Lindsay Broadhead. I'm Dave Trafford, and at the bottom of the hour, our friend Keith Leslie will join us from CH Television. So don't go away. There's still lots to talk about right here on The Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast.
The On the Ledge podcast on the iHeartRadio Talk Network.
All right, welcome in. It is the post-debate edition of On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. Welcome in. We're live on Newstalk 1010 radio tonight. And so thanks for the crew for all the support and getting us, keeping us in between the curbs as we get through this hour. In the studio, Tim Hudak is here, Deb Hutton with us, John Wright, Lindsay Broadhead, and as I mentioned before the break, Keith Leslie will be joining us, and he, of course, is a regular voice on the Ledge, has been since almost day one. So I want to get back to the format, and earlier today, Lindsay, we were talking about, the merits of it. You already brought it up, but there was the question as to whether or not the nature of the format itself makes it more difficult to actually get anything of substance. And I say that because, we've got a minute now. We want to talk about the housing crisis. Everybody gets a minute. And I understand why you do that, because you've only got 90 minutes. But if you were going to reinvent that, to your point, how do we get at a format that actually cuts through and matters? Because to John's point, there are people who say, "What the hell with it? I don't, this isn't moving the needle. I'm not even engaged by it."
Yeah, well, I think that's the $1 million debate question that people are asking. People keep fooling around with the formats, and I think, look, there's some strengths and benefits to this evening's format. For those who didn't listen but are eating this up now, just in the post-debate format, they seem to bookend the debatables with standalone questions, but that were more policy oriented. So what would happen is the tenor and the energy went really high in the debate, and then they focused in on these short answer questions. So, if you're like me and you think most of the value of the debate is actually afterwards, that's the modern debate. It's trying to find these clippables and then amplify it in various campaigns. That's, I think, why Bonnie and Marit spoke over Ford through most of his answers. They just left him with no clippables. Whether that matters or not in the numbers, probably not. John can talk to that. But certainly, my heart would like a more substantive debate. I'd like to hear policy ideas that aren't just a slogan or a catchline. I'd like them to be unpacked. Ontario is desperate right now for meaty solutions to things, and creative solutions to things. So yeah, would love a meaty debate format. I just haven't seen it work in the last number of years.
Well, one of the clippables, I think, was at least Crombie was talking about healthcare, and she was having to be on the healthcare file, and everybody generally agreed that was the lane that she needed to pound away at. But when Ford was talking, she wanted to ask him the question about the money that he has put into healthcare versus the spa.
By your own admission, Doug, you put $1.8 billion into your plan for healthcare, you put more into the spa at Ontario Place at $2.1 billion. Yeah, you might build hospitals, but you're not recruiting doctors, you're not recruiting nurses, and you're not giving them the operating costs. I'd like you to look into the camera, and I'd like you to tell the people at home who lost loved ones while they were on the wait list what you did over the past 7 years to fix our healthcare system, because it's broken. We're in crisis, and you're bragging about what you've done. It's been an abysmal failure.
Deb, she may have been nervous, but that's one of those clippable moments where I think it worked in her favor.
I thought she was too hot. Like, I think that is a moment where you say, and I would have practiced this with the Premier if I had been involved. Premier, there are people whose deaths are on your doorstep. You made decisions. Like, she should have lowered the tone and gone after him. That's what she needed to do. I met a mom who did this. She was just too hot, Dave. Just way too hot to be effective, in my view. And probably easier for me to say because I'm female. But honestly, it did not come across well from my perspective. I am intrigued, though, by your comment that if you were listening to this on radio as opposed to watching it, you may have got a different feel. So I'm actually going to go do that after we chat tonight, to just listen to it, because it's possible she did not come across as poorly on radio if you weren't watching as she did on camera, because way too hot for a topic that serious.
Well, and I say that because you weren't aware of the reliance on the notes. I mean, that's the first thing that just threw me right off. Do you know what you're talking about?
Healthcare.
Right.
Like Doug lucked out in that he got the question on tariffs, on leadership as his first. He got to answer it. She lucked out equally. Her first opportunity to talk on a substantive issue where she led the tone was on healthcare. Like, she should have nailed that in the first quarter of the debate. She didn't. She read her notes. So,
Tim, I mean, you and I talked earlier in the day about it, and you're not a fan of changing the format. But how do we make this more of an effective use of time on the campaign? Because, quite frankly, unless you're the incumbent party, everybody else has to take time away from the campaign to get ready for a debate that nobody's really paying any attention to and relying on us around the table to, feed it back to them in the morning after.
Well, it's not been invented yet, right? There's no perfect way to do a debate. I think Steve Paikin was the master. David Common did all right. I'm going to give him a 7 out of 10. I actually liked the fact that he had some personal questions in there around relatability, because that is important. People want to know, you as a person, can they identify with you? Do you understand what they talk about around the kitchen table? So I actually liked that addition. But, here's the bottom line. Whatever rules you make, they apply equally to everyone. And you have to work within those rules to make the best impression. And really, the opposition leaders had to do 2 things. Number 1, knock Doug Ford down several pegs and free up some votes. And then for those votes, prove that you've got the chops to lead the province or replace Premier Ford. None of the 3 candidates, though, Dave, knocked down Ford any chops at all.
Yeah, John, I think we talked a little bit just before the break in terms of, the numbers and moving the needle. And I know you were out shoveling snow with neighbors today, because bring it from the debate to what's actually happening on the street. And you got to wonder how, most folks who were watching this, quite frankly, my wife was sitting on the couch reading a book while the debate was on.
Yeah, and many others were probably tuning into the disaster that had happened out at the airport to find out, for the first time what really happened, and tuning into CNN to see, whether or not they had more information on our own airways. Look, I come back to this and think of the Canada-U.S. hockey game the other night, but for the simple reason that you had them play the other night. They won this afternoon, the Canadians. And now they're going to go and play another game against the United States for the final. They've had a chance to see how they play. They've had a chance to, figure out that they were much more heavy hitting and how they had the defensive zone set up so that the Canadians now can adjust and move in a particular way. There was another debate. It was Friday. It was, pretty much not exactly the same format, but pretty much the same questions. And so you kind of have to look at this and go, all right, well, Bonnie Crombie and Marit Stiles, the first time they really have a chance to debate in this kind of format. They had the weekend to prepare for it. And that's where I kind of gained. I'm with Deb on this, and also with Lindsay. I mean, there was a chance for Bonnie Crombie to act appropriately, to nail this based on having gone through it on Friday, get the nerves out, and have some kind of design where you could say, these are the type of questions that are going to work. These are the type of answers that will probably hit a little bit better. But the tone, this is everything, because you gotta, you've got to be very calm in terms of how you're going to be able to portray your own leadership style. So I was really surprised. They went through a full debate on Friday. A lot of these same questions were asked. A lot of the answers were the same. And yet tonight we just got it as if it were brand new. And I don't think they were up to the job.
Surely there was another rehearsal between Friday and tonight.
Well,
so to your point, absolutely. All right, time. We got to take a quick break here, but don't go away. We've still got lots to talk about. We're doing the post-debate analysis here on the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. We're here with Tim Hudak, Deb Hutton, John Wright, Lindsay Broadhead, and we'll hear from our friend Keith Leslie when we come back on the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast.
This is a special edition of the On the Ledge podcast with complete post-leaders debate coverage and conversation on the iHeartRadio Talk Network.
Yeah, it's the daily edition of On the Ledge. Welcome in, Dave Trafford here, along with John Wright. Lindsay Broadhead is here. Tim Hudak's at the table. Deb Hutton joining us as well. And we are joined by Keith Leslie. He's a regular commentator on CHTV. That's where he was tonight. So wrapping things up there. Just without the advantage of having heard the first half of this program, Keith, just be curious to get your top line on response to the debate tonight.
Well, I was surprised off the top when Doug Ford seemed so nervous, especially when the very first question that was put to him first was on the very topic he wanted to discuss, which is, who's the best leader to take on Trump and the tariff threats. He stumbled a bit there, and his talking points were kind of off. He was wrong in a couple of places. So I was surprised by that, but he eventually got his feet underneath him, even though the attacks were coming from all sides. So in the end, he held his own. So I thought that's all Doug Ford really needed to do, was not lose his cool, despite the fact that Bonnie Crombie, especially towards the end, got in a couple of really good shots at him there. You don't know about the price of eggs. You were born to privilege, that sort of thing. That may play well for her a little bit, but I don't know in the long run if it really hurt him that much. So as I say, overall, I think we saw Ford do as good as he could do, or, didn't lose his cool, held his own. And the two opposition leaders, the Liberal and the NDP, seem to be fighting for second place.
Yeah, and we noted that just generally the group thought that Crombie looked a little shaky around her use of notes, and that probably certainly hurt her in terms of perceptions if you were watching it on TV. If you listened on the radio, it was a different thing, I think.
I also thought she had a strange, when she was being asked questions by the reporters, she had eye contact, didn't have eye contact, and she was looking off to the side. And yet when she was being questioned by the other leaders, she did make eye contact. So it was a bit of just a strange appearance to it there. And she was fumbling and going back to the leaders, or to her binder notes. But I thought overall she did pretty well. She had to introduce herself to Ontarians in a way that no one else on the stage did. I know at Marit Stiles' first leaders debate, but she's had a seat in the legislature for the last year. Bonnie Crombie has not. So I think she had to be a little more aggressive throughout the debate. And anytime we saw everyone talking over each other and, annoying the audience, Bonnie Crombie was always in the thick of that, because she's trying so hard to get her message out and to show that she's not the way that she's been portrayed in those ads that the Tories have been running for the last year.
Deb, you had mentioned before the break that Crombie came out way too hot. Just by contrast, I thought it was interesting to see Marit Stiles talking about the healthcare issue. And the question was to, I think, Schreiner, how can you afford to actually, make the promise around primary health care, i.e. family doctors? And I thought her answer was probably the one that Bonnie Crombie had hoped that she had given in this case.
We cannot afford not to get this right. We cannot afford not to have family doctors for everyone. It's essential and it's crucial. But let's be clear, the healthcare crisis that we are in right now, the hallway healthcare crisis, was invented by the previous Liberal government. But Doug Ford and his government have poured gasoline all over it. We have a crisis in our province right now. He can talk about how much he's spent on healthcare, but the reality is, talk to any Ontarian about the state of our healthcare crisis right now. It's terrible. We cannot afford not to invest in healthcare right now and make sure people have family doctors, but also nurses in our hospitals right now.
Well, and to the point where, she got Crombie to agree with her in terms of the final point. But her point, or the line is, how can we afford not to do this, is a great place to start there.
It is. And as I said at the outset, Bonnie has not made the case for why she will get something done that they're pretty much all saying they're going to do. She's made it the cornerstone of her campaign in many ways, but she hasn't sort of said, I will get you a family doctor, and it may be a doctor, it may be at an expense of this, or this is what I am going to not do, or like she's not made any compelling case other than it's my priority. And I don't think that it doesn't lift it off the page for people in the way she has to make it happen.
The flip side of that, though, that works for the premier, Tim, in as much as he can say it's my priority and I'm going to get it done, and that has worked for them in that respect. To the extent where Bonnie Crombie's being challenged on costing out a platform, but the premier really kind of was able to rope-a-dope that question around how you're going to pay for the tunnel, et cetera.
Yeah, a little bit. Look, I think where Doug Ford could have been stronger, though, is he has a tendency to rhyme off numbers. Right? $1 billion of this, 5.7% that, as opposed to connecting with stories. And, usually when he's before a crowd or interacting with people, he's very good about that, relating a story, making people understand what it means to them. So he got, I think, too much in the defensive mode of just relaying numbers, including on the tunnel. He could have said, people are stuck in their cars for an hour commuting between Mississauga and their jobs in Toronto. They'd rather be with their friends, their family. But you know what? Honestly, the only one I caught telling any stories was Marit, and that was near the end. An anecdote, a vision of what people are going through. That's far more valuable than 100 statistics.
John, does it surprise you that the lineup in Walkerton didn't come up tonight for a family doctor?
No. Again, I think it's really important to go to the poll that Tim Hudak and Counsel put out the other day. What it showed was that there is deep dissatisfaction to the majority of people on almost every major policy area of this government. But there's one that cuts right through, and that was that 53% of people felt that the tariffs were the most important issue that we should be talking about. And there's kind of a wall of sound. It's like Phil Spectrum election, right? Like it's just this wall of sound out there that is tariff and the economy and great concern over jobs and all that other sort of stuff, which makes it very, very difficult to talk about everything that you just said. Like, I mean, it is the backdrop where people are concerned about making sure that the tariffs don't shut down their plant or their steel mill in Ontario, or that we are going to remain a country that's independent. It's hard to then have a debate around some of those other, they are important, but some of those other issues. So the premier, when he stood up there tonight, was really the face of that debate. He was calm. He had the economy listed as every subsection of whatever he was going to be talking about. And I just think that, people today are just not listening to the other issues that the other parties want to push. And they are legitimate, whether it be healthcare, education, doctors, all of those sort of things. But the vast majority of people in this province are not on that wavelength. They're on his wavelength. And that's where his advantage is. So he doesn't have to talk about those things particularly, because when he left the stage tonight, it reverted back to his channel as opposed to theirs.
And I don't disagree, Lindsay, in as much as that was the strategy and it worked for the premier. But I think you might have been the one who brought it up in a previous, pod edition last week. You said that probably the most effective campaigning Crombie did was not to have to be in the picture or say anything. It was that lineup for primary care doctors in Walkerton. And I just a little more than surprised that wasn't brought up. It wasn't really emphasized.
Well, and it's less of a first of all, everything John Wright says, I always agree with 1,000%. So so much good stuff there, but less about the debate and more about her campaign. That Walkerton visual and story said more than anything could ever say in a debate. So I don't understand why her campaign hasn't set up 1,000 Walkerton situations so that over and over again, there'd be visuals and other people telling the stories of what a Doug Ford government has done wrong. As John, I think, hit the nail on the head, no one can own the tariff story like Ford. It's impossible for all of the reasons that we know. So in this case, don't fight that story. Fight it with what you do own. And as Deb and others have said, it was healthcare. It doesn't mean you're going to win at all, but you could have used that as the illustration for all of the other failings. So much better. And instead, what she does is she rhymes off a litany of all the things, like John just said. And as a consumer of the news, I can't take in all the other things. All I hear is, oh, God, you're right. The ship is sinking, right? But I just want to go with the guy who can maybe keep me safe. So it's a very strange strategy, I find. However, that's what they doubled down on in this debate.
Okay, well, we'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll have a few minutes. I just want to get everybody's sense of, okay, now what should we be looking for, whether it's an ad spend, where the leaders are going to be, and how they're going to actually leverage or make any use of what came out of the debate tonight. It's On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast, our post-debate edition. I'm Dave Trafford, and you're listening to us this evening on Newstalk 1010.
The On the Ledge podcast continues on the iHeartRadio Talk Network.
Welcome in, Dave Trafford here with the crew around the table. It's our post-debate edition of On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. And if you're just listening to us for the first time on Newstalk 1010, welcome in. We're doing this on a daily basis. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on Apple, iHeart, Spotify for the audio edition. So feel free, subscribe to the channels, and if you've got thoughts and comments, you can go to my website, davetrafford.com, hit the talkback button, and if there's anything in particular that you want to say about the show, about the campaign, about the debate, why don't you leave us a message, and it'd be great to hear from you. Before we get into the what's next, I just do want to, I think there was lessons learned here in a very short period of time for the Premier, and I think it was illustrated by the question that Mike Schreiner asked when he put the Premier's feet to the fire over all three parties are willing to double the ODSP, the disability benefit in the province. And Schreiner asked the Premier, would he do the same?
The three of us have all said we would double ODSP rates.
Yes.
People are living in legislated poverty. And I'm wondering if Mr. Ford thinks it's okay in a province as wealthy as Ontario that people would be forced to live in legislated poverty on $1,300 a month when average market rent in this province is $1,600 a month and over $2,000 in Toronto. How can we sleep at night knowing that people with disabilities can't even afford to pay the bills?
Keith Leslie, good question, and it was framed properly from Mike Schreiner. And last week when the Premier was asked that question, he got into the Flintstones problems and, comparing to people watching the Flintstones. Tonight he answered the question the way he should have answered the question last week.
He did not conflate Ontario disability support payments with Ontario Works, the welfare program. He stayed away from that tonight, which is where you got your sitting on the couch in the basement watching the Flintstones quote that got him in a bit of trouble last week. His position is at least a reasonable one for a comeback in that we raised the rate of payment to ODSP and by something like 17% in the last 3 years by tying it to the rate of inflation. So it's a policy, it's a plan, it's at least some sort of a defense without resorting to welfare bums sitting around watching the Flintstones. So at least from that point of view, he stayed on message and he didn't conflate the two issues. So I thought that was a better response. I was quite surprised on another issue when he was asked, I thought the second easiest question of the night beyond the first one, which was, will you build homes on the Greenbelt? And, all three of the other leaders were able to quickly say, no. And but in trying to take a bit of history of it, he's clearly fumbled that this is still very a sensitive topic for him. And yet none of the other leaders piped up and came back with, the RCMP are still investigating. They didn't pick home with it when they could have. They didn't use the hot mic moments that they could have to get at him either. So I thought Ford would get off relatively light when he could have taken much harder hits on this.
Quick around then. Let's just what do we expect next? And I heard somebody last week talking, Deb, about the most effective way to cut through right now is ad spends. So is this where we're going to see the air war happen?
Yeah, 100%. And I think the only question for me is how much will the Conservative campaign spend on Pro-Doug, Protect Ontario, which I think are effective ads, and how much will they put their foot on Bonnie's neck? And I don't know the answer to that. I would think they wouldn't do that much, but you also don't want her to get up off the mat either. So we'll see what happens coming out of the debate. But you're going to see a ton of spend. Keep in mind, after tonight, we have 9 full days of campaigning only, and you've got a 20-point advantage plus for the premier. So they just need to play it safe and bomb the heck out of the airwaves.
Lindsay, it's a front runner's campaign, right? It always has been, but these last 10 days or so, I don't know if the wisdom of putting your boot on Crombie's throat here, because there wasn't a lot that said that was necessary. Now maybe I'm wrong. Deb would know better, but just for messaging, what do you think?
Yeah, I keep going back to the official party status problem. I think. The Liberals, despite the fact that she, of course, says she's in it for the win, I just don't think that's a viable target anymore. She's in it for a different kind of win, which is something that the Liberals, frankly, haven't had in a while. And the NDP may be having that same fight. In terms of ad spend, Deb would know better. My instinct would be slightly different. I think it would be assuming his win and setting himself up well for post-election, so that whatever does happen with Trump and then in Ottawa, he's set up with that tone and using it more as an advertising campaign for the future.
Yeah, it's worth noting, Tim, that there's also another visit to Washington on the calendar, right?
Yeah, no, that works very, very well for Ford, and opposition leaders can't match it. Look, Dave, this goose is cooked. The parrot is dead. The show is over. It's just the size of the majority that counts. And I think Deb's right. My instinct would be here that you want to have a large majority and you want to knock Bonnie down. So I think the Conservatives will go more negative to try to hold the Liberals to as few seats as possible, and then think about a fourth government after that.
Yeah, John, there must be research out there that says the carbon tax is still sticking to Bonnie Crombie. Doesn't matter what she says because it came up again tonight.
Well, it may be, but I would say the following. Number one, I think that the Liberal numbers will move in some of the urban centers, and mainly because the Liberal numbers federally are moving. You can see the lift in the polls that the province is getting, and it's not because of her. It's because people are more open to the door to listening to somebody. So you look at somebody in St. Paul's, for instance, where you've got Stephanie Smythe, well-known broadcaster who's running for the Liberals here against Jill Andrews, who is the NDP candidate who's held the riding for 2 times. I mean, that may open up into a potential where people say, you know what, I'll take a shot at this and put the Liberal back in. So I think there's going to be opportunities for that, but not based on the campaign itself. Secondly, we don't talk a lot about Mike Schreiner, but I think somebody said here at the beginning, I don't know why he's there anymore. Like, he had a shot to be the leader of the Liberal Party instead of what he's doing, and he made his choice, and it's kind of like, thanks so much for showing up, but I don't know why we have him there, to debate. It really will now be on a focus, in my view, not on Ford, who's got to run away, but more importantly, on the NDP and the Liberal vote to see what they can cannibalize amongst each other in order to either get the right amount of seats for that party status, or that the Liberals can carve out a couple of more, or 2 or 3 more. But I don't think Bonnie's going to win her seat, and that may be the biggest holdback.
Yeah, Keith, 60 seconds to you. Is this a matter of the NDP and the Liberals going at it hammer and tong and just leave the Ford team where they are?
Well, pretty much. I mean, that's where they've got to go. They're fighting for second place, and they're both fighting for official party status, I think, at this point, given the numbers that Ford's racking up. And as for the premier, the PC leader himself, playing it safe, he skipped the scrums after the debate again tonight. He was supposed to be first up. So he has not and will not apparently give a single interview to an Ontario-based reporter during this entire election campaign. I think that's going beyond playing it safe to shooting himself in the foot. Why wouldn't he sit down for one? But he won't. And of course, most of his candidates aren't debating. So I think that, they should be held to account on some of this stuff, but they're getting away with it. And as you say, it's a race for number 2 position.
All right, well, we'll leave it there. Thanks to the crew around the table tonight. Deb Hutton, it was great to have you on the show, along with Tim Hudak, John Wright, Lindsay Broadhead, Keith Leslie. I'm Dave Trafford. This is On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast, the daily edition, and you can watch us on YouTube, listen on iHeart, Spotify, and Apple. Thanks for being here.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.